The school play was picture perfect. Bright stage lights, proud parents, nervous giggles. But one man sat alone in the back row. A faded green jacket, a scar carved into his cheek. A veteran who had not been inside a crowded room in years. Then his three little girls in matching golden dresses stepped into the spotlight. What they did next made the whole auditorium cry, including their father. That man was Sergeant Thomas Mitchell, a decorated combat veteran who had spent the last 2 years avoiding crowds, avoiding school plays, avoiding anything that reminded him of the world he left behind in Afghanistan. His face still carried the scars from an IED blast. His daughters knew he was different. They saw him flinch at loud noises. They saw him sit alone. What they didn't know was that tonight, on that stage, they would reach him in a way no therapist ever could. The question is, can a father who has been hiding from the world finally let the world see him? To understand what happened that night, you need to understand the man who walked into that auditorium. Sergeant Thomas Mitchell wasn't always afraid of crowded rooms. Before the blast, he was a squad leader in the 101st Airborne Division. 3 combat deployments, 2 Bronze Stars, a wife named Rachel, and 3 baby girls born while he was serving overseas, Emma, Sophie, and Lily. He used to joke that the only thing tougher than leading patrols in Kandahar was handling 3 toddlers at once. Then came February 14, 2020. His vehicle hit a pressure plate IED outside a village in Helmand Province. The blast threw him 30 feet. Shrapnel tore through his face and left side. He spent 11 months at Walter Reed, underwent 14 reconstructive surgeries. The surgeons rebuilt his jaw, saved his left eye, but the scar running from his cheekbone to his collarbone never faded. Neither did the nightmares. When Thomas finally came home, he wasn't the same man who left. He couldn't sit in restaurants without scanning every exit. He couldn't handle the noise of birthday parties. The school called about parent-teacher conferences, and he found himself pulling into the parking lot, hands shaking, before driving away. Over 1 million American veterans carry visible scars from their service. For many, those scars become walls between them and the life they used to live. Rachel tried everything: counseling, support groups, even a service dog named Atlas who could sense when the flashbacks were coming. But Thomas kept retreating deeper into himself. He missed the girls' first dance recital. He missed their kindergarten orientation. Each time, he told himself next time would be different. But the shame of not showing up made the next crowd feel even bigger. The triplets were 5 when their school announced the spring play, Heroes Among Us. The teacher, Mrs. Henderson, had been planning it for months. She wanted each class to honor someone they considered a hero. The girls knew exactly who they wanted to honor. They started practicing at home, whispering lines to each other when Thomas was in the other room. They never told him what they were planning. Rachel knew this was the moment. She sat down with Thomas 3 weeks before the performance. "The girls are going to be on stage," she said. "They want you there, not behind a screen, not hiding in the back." "You," Thomas said nothing. He stared at the scar in the bathroom mirror that night for a long time. Then Sophie did something she'd never done before. She walked into the bathroom, climbed onto the small stool, and looked at her father's reflection. "Daddy," she said, "your face looks like a map." Mrs. Henderson says maps show where heroes went. "You went somewhere brave, didn't you?" Thomas didn't sleep that night. But the next morning, he told Rachel he would go. "Here's something you need to know about visible scars and veterans. Studies show that veterans with significant facial scarring report higher rates of depression, anxiety, and social isolation. Many avoid public events not because they don't want to attend, but because they dread the stares, the questions, the pity." Thomas had learned to read those reactions. He knew exactly what it felt like to be the person everyone looks at for the wrong reasons, and he knew his daughters were old enough now to understand. The night of the play, Thomas put on his old olive green jacket. Not his dress uniform, he hadn't worn that since the hospital, but the jacket felt right. He walked into the school auditorium and immediately felt the walls closing in. Fluorescent lights, dozens of parents, the hum of conversation. He found a seat in the very last row in the corner with an exit door 6 feet to his right. He told himself he could leave any time. The curtains opened. The kindergarten class sang a song about firefighters. The first graders did a skit about teachers. Thomas kept his eyes on the backstage door where his daughters would appear. Rachel sat 3 rows ahead with her mother. She kept glancing back at him, a silent check-in. He gave her a small nod that meant "I'm still here." Then the music changed. Curtains parted again, and 3 little girls in bright golden dresses walked onto the stage. The audience applauded politely. The girls stood side by side holding hands. They looked so small under the stage lights. Thomas leaned forward. Mrs. Henderson stepped to the microphone and introduced the performance. "Our next presentation comes from the kindergarten class. They wanted to honor someone very special tonight, someone who gave more than we can ever know." The girls didn't start singing. Instead, Emma, the tallest by half an inch, stepped forward. She held a folded American flag in her small hands. She looked directly at the back row, directly at her father. "Daddy, we know you sit alone. We know you think we don't see you, but we see you every day, and we want the whole world to see you too." The room went silent. Thomas felt his chest tighten. Every eye in that auditorium slowly turned toward the back row, toward the man in the faded green jacket, toward the scar that ran down his face like a river on a map. But the girls weren't finished. Sophie and Lily walked to the edge of the stage, and together all 3 began to sing. Not a song from the school's music book, a song they had learned in secret. A song Thomas used to hum to them when they were bobbies before the blast, when he still thought he could be the father he wanted to be. That's when the tears started, not from Thomas, from the mother in the front row. Then the grandfather too rose back. Then the teacher standing in the wings. The whole room began to break, and Thomas sat frozen because he realized something he hadn't understood until that moment. His daughters hadn't planned a performance, they had planned a rescue. The song lasted 90 seconds. That was long enough to crack a room full of strangers wide open. When the final note faded, Emma, Sophie, and Lily stood perfectly still, their golden dresses glowing under the lights. They were waiting. Every adult in that auditorium understood what they were waiting for. They were waiting for their father to stand up. Thomas didn't move. He couldn't. The weight of 200 eyes pressed down on him. The scar on his cheek felt like it was burning. He could hear his own heartbeat over the ringing silence. Rachel turned in her seat, tears streaming down her face, and mouthed 3 words, "It's okay." He still didn't stand. Then Lily, the smallest of the 3, did something the school had not rehearsed. She stepped off the stage. The stage was only a foot high, but for a 5-year-old in a dress, it was a commitment. She landed softly, walked down the center aisle, and stopped in front of her father's row. "Daddy," she said, loud enough for the whole room to hear, "you don't have to stand. Can I sit with you?" Thomas pulled her onto his lap, and the auditorium erupted, not in applause, in something rower. People were crying openly. The principal, a retired Marine, was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Mrs. Henderson had her hands over her mouth. A grandfather in the 3rd row removed his glasses and just let the tears fall. Emma and Sophie ran down from the stage to join their sister. The 3 girls climbed onto their father's lap and into the seat beside him. They wrapped their arms around him. Thomas buried his face in their hair. At that moment, the performance was officially over, but something else was just beginning. Here is what the crowd did not know. Thomas Mitchell had not left the house in 8 months for anything that wasn't a medical appointment. He had stopped attending family dinners at Rachel's mother's house. He had stopped going to the grocery store. He ordered everything online. The school play was his first voluntary public appearance since the blast. He had almost turned back 3 times on the drive there, and he had not told Rachel about the letter he received 3 weeks earlier. A letter from the Department of Veterans Affairs. His disability rating review had been denied. They had reduced his benefits by 30%, citing insufficient evidence of ongoing psychological impairment. The government's doctors had evaluated him via telemedicine for 45 minutes and determined he was functioning well enough to work. Thomas had not worked in 2 years. He could barely sleep, but on paper he looked fine. That letter was in his jacket pocket the night of the play. He had planned to tell Rachel after the performance. He had planned to tell her that they might lose the house, that the savings were almost gone, that he had failed them. But then his daughters sang, and for the first time in 8 months, Thomas did not feel like a broken soldier being evaluated. He felt like a father being found. Let's rewind to what led to that night, because the story is bigger than one school play. The triplets were born while Thomas was on his second deployment. Rachel sent him videos every day. He watched them in a dusty forward operating base, sitting on a cot, whispering goodnight to a phone screen. He promised himself he would never miss another moment when he got home. Then the IED changed everything. When Thomas came home from Walter Reed, the girls were 3 years old. They had seen their father in video calls. They had kissed his picture before bed. But the man who walked through the door had a face that looked like it had been rearranged. The left side of his mouth didn't move the same way. His eye drooped. He walked with a limp. Emma hid behind Rachel's legs for the first 3 days. Sophie asked him why he looked like a monster. Thomas laughed it off, but the laugh was hollow. Rachel enrolled the girls in a support program for military children. The program helped them understand what happened to their father. They learned words like trauma and PTSD. They made drawings of their dad with a cape, like a superhero who got hurt fighting a villain. The program also told Rachel something she already knew. Children of service members often try to protect their parents emotionally. They become little adults too soon. They learn to read the silences. Emma, Sophie, and Lily had become experts at reading their father's silences. They knew when he was slipping into a flashback by the way his breathing changed. They knew when to give him space and when to crawl into his lap. They were 5 years old. The school's spring play was supposed to be a simple event, but Mrs. Henderson had a different vision. She had taught military children for 17 years at this school, which sat 10 miles from Fort Bragg. She had seen deployment send-offs and homecoming surprises. She had watched kids draw their parents on lunchroom napkins. She knew that for military families, the normal school events carried an emotional weight that civilian families never felt. She asked her students to write about a hero. Emma wrote about her father. Sophie wrote about her father. Lily wrote about her father. The assignment was supposed to be 1 page. Lily wrote 4 pages. Mrs. Henderson called Rachel and asked if the girls could perform something special. Rachel agreed but insisted on one condition: Thomas could not know. If he knew, he would find a reason not to come. The girls practiced the song in their room every night for a month. They closed the door. They whispered the lyrics. Thomas heard them through the wall but assumed they were singing nursery rhymes. He had no idea they were learning the lullaby he used to hum to them as infants, the one he sang when he was still healthy, still sure of himself, still able to hold them without flinching. On the morning of the play, Thomas woke up at 4 a.m. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. Rachel found him there. "Are you going to come?" she asked. "I don't know, Thomas, they need you. They don't need to see me like this in front of a crowd. They need to see you at all." He said nothing. Rachel left for work. Thomas sat there until the girls came downstairs in their school uniforms. Emma hugged him. Sophie kissed his cheek where the scar curved into his jaw. Lily handed him a drawing she had made. It showed a man with a scar on his face standing next to 3 little girls. Above them, in crooked letters, "My dad is a hero." Thomas folded the drawing and put it in his jacket pocket, next to the VA letter. Now back to that auditorium. After Lily climbed onto his lap, after the room broke into tears, after the principal announced a 15-minute intermission, something unexpected happened. The auditorium did not empty. Parents stayed. They approached the back row. Some shook Thomas's hand. One woman, a retired Army nurse, knelt beside him and said, "I know what you're carrying, you're not alone." Thomas did not know how to respond. He had spent 2 years pushing people away. Now they were pushing back. Then the school principal, a man named Danforth, walked over. He stood quietly until the other parents drifted away. He was a retired Marine, stocky, with close-cropped gray hair and a voice that carried authority without harshness. "Sergeant Mitchell," he said, "I was at Ramadi in 2005. I know what it costs to be in a room like this. What your daughters just did, that's not something you forget." Thomas looked at him. "I didn't do anything. You showed up, that's everything." Danforth reached into his pocket and handed Thomas a business card. It was not his school card. It was from a veteran peer support network. "Call this number," Danforth said. "Not for you, for them." He nodded at the girls. Thomas took the card. Rachel approached, holding Lily by the hand. The other 2 girls were talking excitedly to their grandmother. Rachel sat down in the seat next to Thomas. "Are you okay?" "I don't know what I am." "That's okay." They sat in silence for a moment, then Thomas pulled out the VA letter and handed it to her. Rachel read it, her face did not change. She folded it carefully and placed it in her purse. "We'll figure it out," she said. "How? They cut our benefits, we're already behind." "We'll figure it out." Thomas looked at his daughters, who were now twirling in their golden dresses, completely unaware that their father had been carrying a secret that could unravel everything. And he realized something that shifted the ground beneath him. The girls had not just rescued him in front of a crowd. They had forced him into a room full of witnesses. People had seen him. People had offered help. The letter in Rachel's purse meant the struggle was far from over, but the isolation had been broken. He could not hide anymore, even if he wanted to. 3 days later, Thomas walked into the office of a counselor recommended by the peer network. It was his first therapy session in 18 months. He sat in a chair, hands on his knees, back straight, the posture of a soldier waiting for orders. The counselor, a woman named Dr. Mariana Cruz, who had worked with veterans for over a decade, asked a simple question. "Tell me what happened that night at the school." Thomas opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He tried again, still nothing. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out Lily's drawing. He laid it on the table between them. Dr. Cruz looked at the drawing. She did not pick it up. "Your daughter drew this." "Yes." "What does it say?" "My dad is a hero." "And what do you think?" Thomas looked at the crooked letters, the stick figures, the scar drawn carefully on the father's face. His daughter had not hidden the scar. She had drawn it. She had made it part of the picture. "I think," he said, his voice breaking, "I think I've been wrong about everything." That session lasted 2 hours. For the first time, Thomas talked about the blast without running from the memory. He talked about waking up in the hospital and seeing his face for the first time in a mirror. He talked about the dreams. He talked about the shame of not being able to attend his children's events. Dr. Cruz listened. Then she told him something he had never heard from a medical professional. "The scar is not your wound, Thomas. The scar is the evidence that you survived. Your daughters already understand that. You're the one who's still learning." The following week, Thomas did something else he had not done in years. He went to the grocery store, not at midnight, at 4 in the afternoon. He walked in, grabbed a cart, and made it through 3 aisles before his heart started racing. He stopped, took a breath, and kept going. A woman looked at his face, then looked away. He did not flinch. He picked up milk, bread, eggs, and a box of cookies for the girls. He paid at the self-checkout. He walked out to the car and sat in the driver's seat, hands shaking, but he had done it. 2 weeks later, the school called Rachel. The video of the play had been shared online. Someone's phone had captured the entire moment. It had been viewed 2 million times. Local news wanted to do a story. Thomas refused at first, but Rachel showed him the comments. Thousands of them, veterans thanking the girls, parents crying. A woman wrote, "My husband came home from Iraq with a scar on his face. He never went to our daughter's graduation. I wish he had seen this." Thomas agreed to one interview. A local reporter came to the house. The girls sat next to him on the couch. Lily held his hand the whole time. The reporter asked him what he wanted people to understand. Thomas looked at the camera and said, "I thought my scar made me invisible, but my daughter showed me that being seen doesn't mean being weak. It means being brave enough to let people in." The segment aired that night. Within hours, the VA regional office received over 3,000 calls and emails from veterans and families. The story had struck a nerve, but not all the attention was positive. Someone in the VA claims department flagged Thomas's file. An internal note appeared in his record. Subject recently featured in media. Possible motive to leverage public sympathy for benefits appeal. Thomas did not know about that note, but he was about to find out. 48 hours after the interview aired, Thomas received a certified letter in the mail, not from the VA, from a law firm representing the Department of Defense. They were opening an investigation into potential fraud related to disability claims. They wanted him to submit to a new in-person examination. They wanted his medical records from before the deployment, and they wanted it within 30 days. Rachel opened the letter. She read it twice. Then she called the peer support number Danforth had given them. The man who answered was a former Marine Corps JAG officer named Ellis Harper. He listened to the entire story without interrupting. When Rachel finished, he said 4 words, "They're trying to bury him." "What do we do?" Rachel asked. "Get me a copy of the school play video, every frame, and tell Thomas he needs to stand his ground because this is going to get ugly before it gets better." Rachel hung up. She walked into the living room where Thomas was reading a book to the girls on the couch. Emma was on his left, Sophie on his right, Lily in his lap. She did not tell him about the letter. Not yet. She watched him turn the page, watched Lily trace the scar on his cheek with her tiny finger, watched Emma lean her head against his shoulder. She thought about the line from Dr. Cruz, "The scar is evidence that you survived." And she thought about what Ellis Harper had said. Outside, the sun was setting. The golden light streamed through the windows and fell across the floor. It was the same color as those dresses from the school play. Thomas looked up and saw Rachel standing in the doorway. "What is it?" he asked. She walked over, sat on the arm of the couch, and took his hand. "Something happened, something I need to tell you, but first I need you to promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you won't go back to the corner of that auditorium. Promise me you'll stay right here in the light." Thomas looked at his daughters. He looked at his wife. He did not know what was coming, but he knew one thing for certain now. He was not alone. That night, after the girls were asleep, Rachel sat down at the kitchen table with the certified letter. She placed it in the center, facing Thomas. He read it in silence. Then he read it again. "They're calling me a fraud. They're opening an investigation. That's not the same thing." "It's the same thing." Thomas pushed the letter back across the table. His hands were steady, but his voice was not. "I spent 11 months in Walter Reed, 14 surgeries. I can't sleep through the night. I can't go to the grocery store without my heart pounding out of my chest. And now they want to examine me like I'm some kind of criminal." Rachel reached for his hand. "Ellis says we fight back. How? I don't have money for a lawyer. I don't have energy for a fight. You have the video. You have 2 million people who watched it. That doesn't pay the mortgage." "No, but it means you're not invisible anymore." Thomas stared at the letter. The logo of the Department of Defense sat at the top like a seal of judgment. He thought about the morning he woke up in the hospital, the first time he saw his face in the mirror. The nurse had handed him a hand mirror and then waited. He had looked at the scar, at the eye that wouldn't close all the way, at the jaw that had been rebuilt with titanium plates. He had put the mirror down and said nothing. That was the moment he started disappearing. Now the government wanted to make sure he stayed disappeared. But Rachel was right about one thing: the video existed and people had seen it. The next morning, a reporter from a national news network called. The local story had been picked up by their affiliates. They wanted to do a longer segment. Thomas said no. Rachel said yes. "We need to control the narrative," she told him. "If we stay silent, they'll fill the silence with their version." Thomas agreed, but only if the interview included Ellis Harper. The segment aired 4 days later. The anchor introduced the story as a veteran's fight for his benefits and his family. They showed clips from the school play. Lily climbing off the stage, Thomas holding her, the room in tears. Then they cut to Ellis Harper in his office, bookshelves behind him, medals on his wall. "The Department of Defense has opened an investigation into Sergeant Mitchell's disability claims," Ellis said. "This is not standard procedure. This is retaliation for going public with his story." The anchor followed up. Retaliation for what? For being seen, for refusing to hide. The DoD does not like veterans who become symbols. They prefer their heroes quiet and compliant. The segment ended with a shot of Thomas walking into Dr. Cruz's office. The message was clear. He was getting help. He was doing the work. Within hours, the DoD's Public Affairs Office released a statement. "The Department of Defense conducts thorough reviews of all disability claims to ensure the integrity of the system. This investigation is routine and does not target any individual." Ellis called Thomas later that night. "They're lying. I have sources inside the regional office. This file was flagged the same day your local interview aired. Someone made a phone call. Who? I don't know yet, but I'll find out." The next week brought a storm. First, the school principal called. Some parents had complained that the play had been turned into a political statement. They wanted assurances that future school events would not involve controversial content. Danforth told Thomas he would handle it, but the damage was done. Thomas felt the familiar pull to retreat. Second, Emma came home crying. A boy in her class had said her father was faking it for money. Sophie punched the boy. Both children were sent to the principal's office. Third, the VA sent a notice rescheduling Thomas's in-person examination to the earliest available date, 3 weeks away. The location, a clinic 2 hours from their home. Thomas would need to be there at 7. Rachel took the day off work. She drove Thomas to the clinic. The building was gray and windowless like a bunker. They sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes. Thomas's leg bounced the entire time. A man in a suit called his name. Not a doctor's white coat. A suit. The examining physician was a civilian contractor hired by the duty, not a VA doctor. The exam lasted 90 minutes. The questions were invasive. Had Thomas ever been hospitalized for mental health before the military? Had he ever filed a complaint against a superior officer? Did he have any history of substance abuse? Had he ever been arrested? Thomas answered each question truthfully. When the doctor asked about the school play video, Thomas said, "That was my daughter's. They wanted to honor me." The doctor made a note. He did not look up. "Do you believe your daughter's performance influenced the public perception of your disability?" "I believe it influenced the public perception of me as a father." "That's not what I asked." Thomas leaned forward. "I know what you're asking. You're asking if I faked a school play to get my benefits back. My daughters are 5 years old. They don't know what a disability rating is. They just know their dad doesn't leave the house." The doctor closed his folder. "We'll be in touch." 2 weeks passed. No word from the duty. The silence was worse than the investigation. Then Ellis Harper called with news. He had found the source of the flag on Thomas's file. A mid-level administrator in the VA regional office, a civilian named Gerald Price. Price had been in the office for 23 years. He had a reputation for aggressively challenging claims from veterans with visible injuries. His internal reviews frequently recommended reductions. But here was the part that changed everything. Gerald Price had never served in the military, and 6 months earlier, he had been investigated for making disparaging comments about veterans receiving disability benefits. The investigation was quietly closed. No disciplinary action. Ellis had obtained a recording of a phone call Price made to a colleague the day after Thomas's local interview aired. In the recording, Price said, "I'm tired of these guys playing the victim card. Get on the school play video and tell me that's not manufactured. We need to send a message." Ellis played the recording for Thomas over the phone. Thomas listened in silence. Then he said, "We release it." "Are you sure? Once it's out, there's no going back." "Release it." The recording went public the next day. Every major news outlet covered the story. The headline wrote itself. VA administrator caught targeting veteran who went viral. Within 48 hours, Gerald Price was placed on administrative leave. The duty announced a review of their disability claims process. The investigation into Thomas's benefits was suspended pending the review. Thomas sat in his living room, watching the news coverage on his laptop. The girls were at school. Rachel was at work. He was alone, but he did not feel alone. Pulled out Lily's drawing from his pocket. He looked at the crooked letters. "My dad is a hero." Then he did something he had not done in years. He called his mother. His mother lived in Florida. They had not spoken in 18 months. The distance was not geographical, it was emotional. She had visited him in the hospital once, cried, and then stopped coming. She told Rachel she couldn't bear to see him like that. Thomas had never forgiven her. The phone rang 3 times. "Thomas." "Hi, Mom. I saw you on the news. Are you okay?" "I'm learning how to be." There was a long pause. Then his mother said, "I'm sorry I wasn't there. I was scared. I didn't know how to be brave." Thomas looked at the scar in the reflection of his phone screen. He thought about the school play. He thought about Lily's drawing. He thought about what Dr. Cruz had told him. "The scar is evidence that you survived." "I'm still learning too," he said. They talked for an hour. Not about the investigation, not about the benefits, not about the scars, about the girls, about the lullaby Thomas used to hum to them, about the things that mattered. When he hung up, Thomas felt something shift inside him. It was small, like a door cracking open, but it was enough. That night, the triplets came home from school with news. Mrs. Henderson had announced a special assembly. The theme, "What makes a hero?" Every student was invited to bring a family member to honor. Emma looked at Thomas. "Daddy, will you come?" The auditorium, the lights, the crowd. Thomas took a breath. "Yes," he said, "I'll be there." And he meant it. The morning of the assembly, Thomas woke up before the sun. He did not sit on the edge of the bed staring at his hands. He stood. He walked to the bathroom and looked at his reflection. The scar was still there. The eyes still drooped. The jaw still moved differently when he spoke. But the man looking back was not the same man who had hidden in the back row of an auditorium 2 months earlier. Rachel appeared behind him in the mirror. She wrapped her arms around his waist and rested her chin on his shoulder. "You ready?" "No." "Good. That means it matters." The girls came running in, already dressed. Emma had picked out his shirt from the closet. Sophie had tied his shoes. Lily had drawn a new picture, the same 3 stick figures, the same crooked words, but this time she had added a 4th figure, Rachel holding a microphone. "Mommy's going to talk too," Lily said. Thomas looked at Rachel. She smiled. She had not told him. Mrs. Henderson had called a week earlier. She wanted Rachel to say a few words at the assembly about what military families go through. Rachel had agreed. She had not told Thomas because she knew he would try to talk her out of it. But she had been practicing in the shower for 6 days. They drove to the school together. The parking lot was fuller than the night of the play. Thomas recognized some faces, the grandfather from the 3rd row, the retired Army nurse. Danforth stood at the entrance, holding the door. "Sergeant Mitchell, good to see you." Thomas nodded. "Good to be seen." The auditorium filled quickly. Thomas took a seat in the 2nd row, not the back. Rachel sat beside him. The girls were backstage with their class. Danforth opened the assembly with a simple statement. "Today we celebrate heroes, not the ones in movies, the ones who wake up every day and choose to keep going." One by one, students stood and honored their family members. A boy honored his mother, a firefighter. A girl honored her grandmother, a nurse. A 4th grader honored his older brother, who was deployed overseas and could not attend. Then Mrs. Henderson stepped to the microphone. "Our final presentation comes from the kindergarten class. Most of you remember what happened at the spring play. Some of you were here. Some of you saw the video. What you might not know is what happened after." The lights dimmed. A screen lowered from the ceiling. Mrs. Henderson continued. "We asked the students to draw pictures of their heroes. Then we asked them one question: what do you want the world to know about your hero?" The screen flickered to life. Emma appeared first, holding her drawing. "My daddy has a big scar on his face. Sometimes people stare. But I tell them my daddy is a map. Maps show where brave people went." The audience shifted. Thomas felt Rachel's hand tighten around his. Sophie appeared next. "My daddy doesn't like loud noises, so when there's thunder we hold his hand. He held us when we were bobbies, now we hold him." Then Lily. She held up the same drawing she had given Thomas weeks ago, the crooked letters, the stick figures, the scar drawn carefully on the father's face. "My daddy is a hero, not because he was a soldier. Because he came home." The screen went dark. Mrs. Henderson walked to the edge of the stage. "The girls wanted to perform one more time, but we decided to do something different today." She gestured to the back of the auditorium. The doors opened. 6 people walked in. They were all men and women in civilian clothes, but Thomas recognized something in their posture. Veterans. Danforth stood and addressed the room. "These are members of the peer support network I told Sergeant Mitchell about. They come to every assembly now. They sit in the back row, they watch. And after the event, they introduce themselves to any veteran in the room who might need someone to talk to." Danforth looked at Thomas. "You started something, Sergeant, and we're going to keep it going." The auditorium applauded. Not the raw, crying applause of the play, something steadier, something that felt like a foundation being laid. Thomas stood. He walked to the stage. His daughters ran to him. He knelt and hugged all 3 at once. Then the retired Army nurse from the play approached. She held a folded piece of paper. "Sergeant Mitchell, this came to my house yesterday. It's addressed to you, but it was misdelivered." Thomas opened it. It was a handwritten letter on official Department of Defense letterhead, not from Gerald Price, from the office of the Undersecretary for Benefits. He read it silently. Then he read it aloud. "After a thorough review of your case and the circumstances surrounding the investigation, the Department of Defense has determined that your disability rating was improperly reduced. Your original rating has been reinstated with full back pay effective from the date of reduction. Additionally, the department has initiated a review of all claims handled by the administrator who flagged your file. We apologize for the hardship caused." Thomas looked up. Rachel was crying. The girls were hugging his legs. The auditorium was standing, but he was not finished reading. "There is a postscript," he said. "It says, the Department of Defense recognizes the bravery of the Mitchell family and commends your daughters for their courage and patriotism." Emma tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, what does that mean?" "It means we're okay, baby. Can we go home now?" "Not yet. There's one more thing I need to do." Thomas walked to the microphone. The room fell silent. 2 months ago, I sat in the back row of this auditorium because I was afraid. Afraid of being seen, afraid of being judged, afraid that my scars made me less than the father my daughters deserved. But they showed me something I had forgot. The scar is not the wound. The scar is what happens after you survive. He paused. There are over 1 million veterans in this country with visible scars. Some of them are in this room today. Some of them are watching from home. And some of them are still sitting in the back row, too afraid to come forward. He looked at Danforth and the peer support group. "If you are one of those veterans, I want you to know something. You are not alone, you are not broken, and your family does not need you to be perfect. They need you to be present." He stepped back. Rachel took the microphone. "There is one more thing," she said. "The girls and I have been working on something, and we want to share it with everyone." She turned to the wings. The school band director nodded. The music started. It was the lullaby, the same one from the play. But this time the entire auditorium began to sing. Teachers, parents, students, the peer support group, Danforth, even the grandfather from the third row. Thomas stood in the center of the room, surrounded by his daughters, his wife, and over 300 strangers singing the song he used to hum to his bobbies. The scar on his face did not burn. It felt like a badge. He did not cry that night. Not because he was holding back. Because for the first time in years he did not need to. The tears had already come. The healing had already begun. 3 months later, the veteran peer support network that Danforth started had expanded to 12 schools across the county. Thomas became a volunteer. He sat in the back row of every assembly, not hiding but watching. When he spotted a veteran sitting alone, he walked over and sat beside them. He said the same thing every time. "You are a map. And maps show where brave people went." Lily's drawing hung framed in the living room. The crooked letters still said, "My dad is a hero." Thomas no longer argued with that. He just tried to live up to it. Thomas Mitchell's story is not unique. His name is not famous. He will not receive a medal for what he did inside that auditorium. But his story matters because it happens every day in school gymnasiums and church basements and VA waiting rooms across this country. Veterans walk into those rooms carrying scars that no one sees, hopping no one will notice. Hopping someone will. What the Mitchell family showed us is that healing does not begin when the scars disappear. It begins when we stop hiding them. The triplets did not ask their father to be the man he was before the blast. They asked him to be the man he was right now, broken, beautiful, and present. There are over 1 million veterans in the United States with visible service-connected scars. Some are facial, some are invisible. Every single one of them has a family who is learning, like Rachel and the girls learned, that love does not require perfection. It requires showing up. Thomas still struggles. Some days he still sits in the back row. But now he knows he is not alone. And he has learned that the scariest thing you can do, walking into a room full of people who might stare, is also the bravest. Because every time you do it, you give someone else permission to do the same. If you know a veteran who is hiding, send them this story. If you are that veteran, know that someone is waiting for you in the front row. All you have to do is walk toward them. And if you made it this far, drop a salute in the comments for the families who hold the line at home. Subscribe to join us for the next story. Because the world needs more maps written by the brave.